Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, right here on voiceamerica.com, America's Voice. And this is the program that shows you how to turn your problems into solutions and your obstacles into opportunities and make your dreams come true. I've been on this network for, I think it's the 24th year now. I've been on many other networks over the years, but I've stayed consistent with Voice America. And this show, Positive Living, is really about how do we transform? What are the things we do when things aren't so easy to really bring joy and peace and love and light and and happiness into our lives? My guest today is Ilene Dillon. She's an MSW, LCSW, LMFT. She has been a radio talk show host and podcast host for years. She's written several books, and she says that she's a recovered angry person, and recovering led her to a successful half century of studying emotions, what emotions are, why we have them, and how to work with them as they're designed to work. Now 82, Ilene is writing books, making personal appearances and on podcasts and summits, and continuing to work individually with people who want to get charge of their lives. And the name of her book is Emotions in Motion: Mastering Life's Built-in Navigation System. Welcome, Ilene.
Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate
Yeah.
that thorough introduction.
So it sounds like it's interesting how we start with your bio as with a recovered angry person. So that must have a lot to do with how you evolved.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, I didn't know I was angry. I think a lot of people don't know they're angry, although the signs are there, but we don't connect it with anger. For example, I had low self-esteem, and when you hold on to anger, your esteem is destroyed. And so there are signs and illnesses. We now have uh, studies that show that repressed anger is part of the etiology of killer diseases like diabetes, like heart and circulatory illness, like cancer. And again, we don't know that if we hold on to anger, that it has the potential to kill us. And I didn't know it at the time that I discovered it. I had a life crisis. Literally, my first husband suddenly left me on my first Mother's Day with a 10-month-old child and said he decided he didn't want to be a father.
Hmm.
And I really got angry with him about that. And that anger surprised me. I mean, it didn't surprise me that I'd be angry for what he did, but it surprised me that it lasted for 2 years. And I started going
Oh.
around and asking people, therapists. I already had a master's degree from the University of California at Berkeley, a master's in social work. And
Hmm.
I couldn't find answers to those questions that you just read off.
Hmm.
What is anger? What is it supposed to do? How do you work with it? Can you get rid of it? Can you fix it? And I went to the library and spent several days there with the reference librarians. And what we discovered is that in those days, researchers didn't study anger or emotions separate from medical diagnoses. If you were schizophrenic and anger was part of that, then you'd know something about anger, but it wasn't
Hmm.
studied separately.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. And you built a lot of your work around that. Even in your other books, you talk a lot about emotion. So is it all about learning to recognize your emotion and accept them? That doesn't mean you're going to act out on them in a negative way, but to be able to understand it, say, yes, I'm angry, and then find another way to channel it.
Actually, it's more complete than that. Those things that you mentioned are very important. We can't work with something we don't notice or accept is present in our lives, so it
Hmm.
is very important. But what I've discovered is why we have the emotions in the first place. And
Mm,
I want to ask you just to look at the paradigm with which I've learned to work over the last 54 years as I've worked with myself on this and helped literally thousands of clients. 54 years of being a therapist is a lot of people that you work with. So uh, the paradigm is that our Earth is a big giant school. We all come here in order to learn and grow. And the way we do the learning and growing is we have experiences. And every time we have an experience, one or more emotions come up with that experience. We can feel happy, we can feel angry, we can feel afraid. And what are those emotions for? What I learned from looking at the anger that I was experiencing is that they are helpers. Emotions are designed to help us decode the experiences we have so that we can identify what it is that we need to learn.
mhm,
A very simple example that I like is loneliness. Normally, we say loneliness is a lack of having enough people in your lives, enough stimulation. But I have learned that emotions are energy. And the more accurate way of looking at loneliness, in my experience, is that loneliness happens when you have more energy going out than coming back in,
mhm,
meaning you're not loving yourself enough.
mhm,
And there's a very simple fix. If I feel like I travel, as we were talking before this show started, I travel in my RV around the country alone. And sometimes loneliness comes up, not often these days, but I know the minute that I experience loneliness, that if I do something that I have a talent for or something I enjoy doing, that will be loving, feel loving to me, and the loneliness will dissipate. And the
wow.
same process works with anger, guilt, fear, and depression.
Hmm. But that is part of awareness. I mean, it's part of sitting with it and recognizing it.
Yes, you like I said, you must realize, yes, this is going on. You can't go through life with blinders on. You have to you have to be there. And the interesting thing is, we are there. We feel the depression, we feel the anger, but up to now, I still think people don't have a good idea of the fact that there's something we can do about it. It's not most of the things that people recommend, even therapists or psychiatrists, psychologists in the field, is, breathe, do meditation, etc. Nothing wrong with those things. They're wonderful. They handle the energy. However, they don't go down to the core of what's causing it, because as soon as you get down to the core and you use that emotion to learn the lesson, it dissipates and you don't have to keep what we do
Mhm,
generally is repeat the
mhm,
same issues over and over and over again
mhm.
because we haven't gotten down to the bottom.
So, what would you do in a situation, Eileen? And this has happened in many families where there's an estrangement. One family member, maybe one spouse, is turning away from the other family, and there's anger because people feel alienated. Now, we can't change that person who's doing that. We can't change that negativity of their attitude. So, how do we release the anger, and knowing maybe part of our family won't be with us, um, and move on?
Okay, so where we want to start is that other people do not make us angry. What the reason we get angry is that we have ideas in our own heads. Just like in kindergarten, you should wait in line, you should not take the last cookie off the plate. We have
Right.
these ideas in our head that are in, I call them shoulds. They're in the forms of should or should not. And what allows us to get angry, what sets us up to get angry, is that those shoulds give us an expectation about how things are supposed to operate. In this case, of the idea that you're talking about, the expectation is we're family and we should all get along and nobody should behave differently or go outside of what we all what we all think we want to have in the family. And the problem with these expectations, they're expectations of how things are supposed to be in the world. And the problem with them is that if they can be violated, they're not accurate. They're not real. So if I think in all families, nobody should ever be alienated, then I'm going to get angry. If I think that whoever is alienated should make every effort to get back in the family and they don't, I'll get angry. I'll feel angry, right? So the only person's anger I can deal with is my own. I can't actually change another person, but I can change my anger. I can update. Anger, the job of anger is to point out to us where we have unrealistic or mistaken ideas about how things are supposed to be in the world. So the best thing for me is to change. Okay, change my expectation. In this case, all right, sometimes a person is alienated. That's something that's going on with them and the other people, maybe with me, but it's their issue, the alienation. It's not mine. And me being angry is not going to get that person to change. I'm just going to keep being angry all the time.
Yeah.
And if I don't speak it out, then I'm going to be holding it inside of me and it'll have those negative consequences I spoke of earlier.
Yeah, and I hear that, and that makes a lot of sense. And, when that person is going to family gatherings and some of the family's missing, there's that pain. Now, I don't know if it's still anger, but it's certainly pain. So it's something that doesn't go away. And from what you're saying, that anger needs to transform into something else. And
Yes,
it may be sadness. It may be, gee, our whole family just can't be together, and isn't that sad?
yes. And that's one of the first things that I learned, Patricia, is that when I finally identified that emotions are energy, I realized, well, we know from high school science classes, we know about energy. You can't create it, you can't get rid of it. It has to move, and it can translate into another form of energy. Those are the things we know about energy. And as you so correctly picked up, that's what we can do with anger. We can move it or allow it to move into another form. Ultimately, the best form, when anger transforms completely, it transforms into enthusiasm.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And then you have to figure out how did that happen? How does that happen in a situation like this? Maybe you can still be enthusiastic with the family that you have, rather than
Well,
expecting everybody to be together.
you don't create that enthusiasm just, okay, I'm going to be enthusiastic instead. In what I have learned, first we have to resolve the learning for our own lives. One of the things that comes up with this example is the issue of respect. Respect is one of the skills of love, and it involves accepting another person without needing to change a hair on their head.
Hmm.
And when we're angry with somebody because they're not behaving the way we think, we're not respecting them. And
Hmm.
so if we learn the issue of respect, we can respect ourselves for not liking what the other person is doing, but we can also respect the other person. That's who they are. That's who they're being right now. This is the pain they're creating in the world. This is the pain they're creating for themselves. And that's theirs. It's not mine. And I don't have to straighten it out unless that other person asks me for help.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's acceptance. I mean, that really is acceptance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you can see how we twirl ourselves around by not accepting what is or by expecting something
Yeah.
that isn't,
Yeah.
right?
And I think I'd like to ask you about that. And that whole piece about acceptance. I think one of the things you're talking about is we have these expectations, in
Hmm.
relationships, in work, in ourselves, and their goals, their expectations, their goals. This is my goal. This is where I want to go. This is what I need to do. And when that gets blocked, then comes the what's wrong with me? Why didn't I do it? I'm not meeting my goal. I'm falling backward. Address that because it happens to everybody.
Oh, that's a really big issue, big thing to talk about. Um, I go back to the giant school. In the giant school, every one of us has come here to learn something. Now we have some things we learn in common, but essentially everybody has their own individual things that they need to learn. And so the minute we have an experience and there's an emotion with it, if we turn and embrace, use the emotion to determine what we need to make a change in, and we embrace the learning, then we move right on through it. There's no residual. You could have been doing the same pattern for 15 years, and when you learn the lesson, it's over like that. It's immediate.
Give us an
And
example of that, Ilene.
um, a, a person who pleases others, who wants to please others and feels rejected, feels hurt because they're not getting the same amount, getting back what they think they ought to be getting for the fact that they're sacrificing themselves. I actually worked with somebody recently who was going through exactly that. We talked about it for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden there was a smile on this person's face because they got that just accepting that this is what's going on, and not, you can't change another person. None of us can change anybody else. We can only change ourselves. And so if we focus on changing ourselves and realizing, oh, I've been giving out all this energy to the other people, and they're not playing the same game I am, and I don't have to be responsible for their game. I can stay with my game, and I can let them, this is the respect part, I can let them be who they are, even if I don't like who they are. That
Yeah,
makes sense?
yeah, very much so. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us. It's a lifelong lesson, don't you think, Ilene?
Actually, now that I'm 82, let me tell you, I don't think it has to be a lifelong lesson. I think what I've seen in myself, because I had a pile of lessons when I first started, like a lot of us do, is that as we complete lessons, the pile shrinks, and we learn certain things. We learn not to go there. You know, I had a run-in with someone in my family recently, and the person hung up on me on the phone. Now, in the olden days, I would get hurt. This time I went, well, I suppose that's what that person needed to do. Let's wait until we reconnect. And I just turned it loose. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it has to go on all the time. When you
Mm-hmm.
finish a lesson, you're finished with it.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take a break. This is very valuable. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Ilene Dillon, who is the author of Emotions in Motion, Mastering Life's Built-in Navigation System. Starting in 2019, Ilene's been writing a book a year. With discovery of a big-time manipulation in 1972, she began her year-long studies to figure out what manipulation is all about. So we'll talk about that as well. She has so many books and so many topics. You're listening to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, and we are back. I'm Patricia Raskin, and we are talking to Illene Dillon, and she's part of the wellness universe. She's a resilience speaker. She's written a book a year for many years, and she has a new book, and it's about emotions in motion. It's all about handling our emotions, handling our anger. She also talks about manipulation. So there's so much that Illene has dealt with in her own life and has worked through and brings that wisdom to us. So welcome back, Illene.
Thank you. And I've
So
helped a lot of other people through it too, which is what gives me a lot of confidence that what I'm
yeah,
talking about really
yeah,
is helpful to people.
yeah. So what do you say to people who are just very upset with what they're seeing in the world? Whether it's nationally, whether it's locally, whether it's globally, and they're scared and they become angry or they become very polarized, right? One very strong opinion instead of another very strong opinion. How do you help people work through that?
Well, many years ago, I went through a personal breakdown process, and my therapist offered me something she called the identity crisis model. And that was a three-step model where you go through breakdown, you are empty, and then you build a new way of living your life. And I've helped hundreds of people go through that. I've never had anybody get stuck in that process. But guess what happens when your life falls apart? And the things that you've used to make things work right don't work anymore, and you think there's not going to be an end, you get scared and feel like you're in a hole and become hopeless and don't know what to do with yourself. So when these changes started, even before COVID, I came to the conclusion that our entire world, all the people of the world, are going through this process now. And it feels terrible. It feels like a breakdown. It feels like something's going wrong. But in reality, just like in nature, if nature is going to make a big change, there comes destruction at some point. That what's there gets destroyed.
Mhm.
And that's what we're going through, in my view, in the world. And so I talk with people about how this happens in an individual, for example, we have become somebody we're really not because we wanted people to love us, so we gave up certain parts of ourselves and so forth. And comes a point where we can't not be ourselves anymore, so things start to break apart. And when they do, we just lose hope because we can't, the things we've done before just don't work. And that's
Mhm.
happening in the world now, the things that we've had before. For example, democracy. We have counted on democracy to be a certain way. I'm in my 80s. I could tell you what democracy is supposed to be, and that's not happening the way that I know it was supposed to be, right? And so I could be terrified that's not happening. Instead, I'm going, well, that's interesting. We need to make some change. And a lot of the breakdown that's gone on is actually has motivated people to vote, for example, to get involved with certain groups, to press for certain outcomes. People who weren't involved or didn't thought voting was useless previously are now thinking about voting and paying attention to things. And it's not a happy or pretty process, but it's working. And so, what I encourage people to do is number one, realize there's a breakdown going on and there's nothing we can do about it. Once this process starts, you have to go all the way through it. Okay. So, there's nothing they can do to change it. And then I give them a choice. Do you want to be upset the whole time? Or would you like to focus on something else that is less upsetting? Which usually is our own life and what we can do or what part we want to play in the change.
And how has that, when you teach these groups or you talk to people, has that been helpful? Is it helpful in reframing?
For most people, it's quite helpful. Some people, as you know, are very dedicated to being victims or being upset
Yeah,
or, and
yeah.
so they're, I essentially say they're not ready. Um,
S- Yeah.
Go
Let's,
ahead.
well, that brings me into your next big topic, which is
Okay.
manipulation.
Hmm.
Manipulation, because I think from where I sit and interviewing thousands of people that manipulation, it sounds like, oh, we can really pick that up, but it can be very subtle and very insidious, particularly if you're somebody that loves to be needed, loves to be wanted, wants that approval and that affection. You can be, I think, very subject to manipulation. Your
I would
thoughts,
ch
Ilene?
I would change one word that you used
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
wants to needs. The whole
Mm,
issue of
mm.
manipulation
Thank
is
you.
that we believe we need something from other people that we can't create for ourselves.
Yes.
And therefore, we don't give up easily. So let me go back to the beginning. In the beginning, when a baby is born, everyone is manipulative. We have to be because we're energy beings. We want to be effective in the world, and we have little undeveloped brains and little bodies, and we can't be effective in the world. So we have to put our own energy through other people. And usually that's a parent or a caretaker. And we seem to have an agreement. Okay, we know you're going to be an infant or a child for this long, and we agree to take care of you during that time. But we are, just because we're in small bodies doesn't mean we don't have filled out souls or ideas, beings inside of us. And those of us who've had children know that about age 2, a child starts going, me, do it myself, because they want to start putting their energy through themselves instead of through other people. But they're not mature enough to do it. Their
Mm,
bodies and brains still aren't big enough. But
mm,
they become big enough between the ages of about 3.5 and 4. That's when
mm,
a child can open the refrigerator and get something, pull the covers up over themselves, get their own drink of water, etc. And so they start putting their own energy to meet their needs through themselves,
mhm,
right? And to be successful in maturing non-manipulatively, such children need help from parents. And I have found that means the help from parents is to ask them to take on more and more responsibility for their own life. And I've found that there are 3 reasons that parents don't usually help, because a whole lot of us, we've missed the memo that we're supposed to outgrow manipulation in our culture. And so many parents think it's too much to ask of a child to take on uh, responsibility. Many parents are just not aware that the child needs that help. But the largest group is people who are still manipulative themselves. And one of the characteristics of people who manipulate is they can't stand being separated from other people. So those parents don't want their children to separate. And they're not realizing what damage they're actually doing to their children. All right. So
mm.
if you don't get that help, what happens is your body keeps growing up. So you look like you're an adult, but when you get to be adult size, you're still operating emotionally at the age of 3.5 or 4 years old. And many times we'll look at somebody who's manipulative and say, how could a grown woman, how could a grown man do something like that? How could they do,
It, so, Eileen, are you saying then that as they grow after 3 or 4 years old, parents are not letting them make enough of their own decisions?
decisions, taking responsibility for things. One of the big issues in the last couple of generations is taking responsibility for their own mistakes, right?
Mm,
So they're not learning to take responsibility. one of the interesting things that happened when my husband left me with my 10-month-old is that I had no idea how I was going to parent a child. So I created a system I called conscious parenting. And it's all about making decisions and taking responsibility and learning from your mistakes. Right. And I've raised three children with that system. They now have children, and their children have also received the benefit of that. It's amazing how different they are. They're more creative. Like my daughter, for example, went on to have three children. The first one made straight A's, and the other two got national merit scholarships, 4-year scholarships for college.
I have to share a story in this when you say that, because I have a similar situation. When my daughter was very little, I wasn't sure I was a guidance counselor in an elementary school, and parenting was just coming on board. This is decades ago. And I was one of the first people in the community, probably in the state, that started parenting groups where the principals and the administrators were nervous, like, oh, what's going to happen? You're bringing parents in to talk about their stuff. And in those days, I used the Adlerian psychology, which was the STEP program, Systematic Effective Training for Parenting by Don Dinkmeyer. And I not only used that in school, but I used that to raise my daughter, which is very similar to what you're saying. And it was very much one of the basis of that is the logical consequences, right? They have to get the consequence of what they do. And I mean, stories like your kid doesn't want to get dressed for nursery school, then take them in their pajamas. You think, oh, isn't that awful? But then they get it. And so it really, my daughter is very accomplished, very independent, and and knows her mind. And yes, I mean, it does create that because you teach them. And I remember, I'll share one more thing with you. I remember bringing her into a grocery store when she was probably 5. And we'd go through the shelves and I would say, now, which cereal would you like? And I'd let her pick. And I'd have people behind me going, what? What are you doing? Like they just couldn't believe that I would let this little child make a decision about what she wanted to eat. And it does. I mean, it's everything that you have said as the result I have seen.
That's really great. Can I share my signature parenting story with you?
Sure, of course.
Okay, well, my son, when he was about 8.5, gave me permission to share
Mm.
this story, although he said he wasn't really happy about me sharing the story, but if it could help other people, it was okay. So he started a new school in the 3rd grade when he was 8, and he needed to walk home from school to our house. And I had taught my children that the earth is a big giant school, and when you have an experience, there's something to be learned. So one afternoon, about 3 weeks into school, I get a call from the 7-Eleven in our community, and the manager says, your son has been caught stealing a candy bar, and here's how we're going to deal with it, and we're sending him home. So he comes home and he walks in the door, and I look at him and say, so I understand today was the day you decided to learn about stealing. Is that right? And he dropped his head and he went, yes, but stealing. I said, well, what did you learn so far? And he said, stealing is not worth it. It's definitely not worth it. And I said, well, that's a good thing to learn, but I never saw you steal anything before. So I'm curious, how is it that you stole today? And he said, well, there were these
Mm,
2 boys he was walking with, and they told him that they stole candy bars, and it was fun, and it would be fun for him too,
mm,
except they didn't get caught, and
hmm.
I did.
Yeah.
And I said, well, let me see if I get this right. You're telling me there were these 2 boys, I mean, these 2 voices outside of you that said stealing would be fun and you should do it. It would be fun for you too. And you did what those voices said. Is that right? And he said, yes. I said, was there ever any other voice you heard?
Mm,
Yeah. Well, whose voice was it? What did it say? I think it was my voice, and it said, don't do it. It's not a good idea.
hmm.
So I said, you listened to the 2 voices coming from outside of you and did what they said, but you chose not to listen to the voice coming from inside of you and what it said. Tell me something. If you could go back and live today over again, would you make the same decision or would you make a different decision? I would make a different decision. I would listen to my own voice. In fact, Mom, I'm not listening to voices coming from outside of me anymore.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
said to him, if you learn today that stealing is not worth it and that it's better to listen to the voice coming from inside of you than to voices coming from outside of you, I think you had a very valuable day and I'm proud of you.
Wow. Mm. Is that in one of your books? I'm
I
sure it
think
is.
it's in that one,
Yeah.
Emotions in Motion.
Yeah.
It's and here was the interesting thing. That was a one-time learning. He never
Mhm.
stole again. I asked
Mhm.
him when he was 14, thinking, oh, I've been telling this story and maybe he's been stealing. So I asked him, have you ever stolen? And he said, no, Mom, I haven't stolen, but I have lied a few times.
Now, Ilene, I want to replay that. We have 30 seconds. I'm going to replay it afterwards. After the break, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you, what would have happened if you handled that very differently? With, look what you did, look how you embarrassed me, you embarrassed the school, and and you're going to get, and it's going to go on your record, and that was a horrible thing. Okay, I'm going to ask you, what would have happened if you had done that? All right, you're listening
Mhm.
to the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show. I'm talking to the delightful Ilene Dillon, who's written many, many books about emotions, about manipulation, about anger, and ultimately about how can we live better, productive, and happy and joy-filled lives. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone, and we are back. We are talking to Ilene Dillon, who is a soon-to-be seven-time Amazon best-selling author with collaborative books on self-care, on healing, on empowerment, on emotions in motion, on anger, on manipulation, and how do we work through all that? So welcome back, Ilene. I know you've had your own
Thank you.
show for many years as a podcast, and you do a lot of work in therapy. As a therapist, you're an MSW and with several other degrees behind your name. But I want to go back to what we talked about in the last segment when you told the story of your son and how you really taught him to be responsible and logical consequences and how to, really learn his own behaviors so he's not again, relying so much. And so you told the story of him stealing a piece of candy, and you went through the whole thing and you worked through the process with him so that he never did it again. But you worked through, what did it feel like? How did you do it? Why did you do it? Would you do it again? Okay. So what I asked you before the break is, what would have happened if you handled that very differently, which is the way many, many parents do handle it. And you said to him, listen, that was horrible what you did. You stole. It's going to go on your record. You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed the school. I'm very ashamed. What would have happened then?
That behavior would have repeated and repeated and repeated and have become a family nightmare. In my experience as a therapist, I've worked with people who have done that. But let me go to my spiritual roots here.
Sure.
My spiritual roots are that we're here to learn and grow and progress. And the way we do that is by doing our own learning. And I taught community ed for families and people, at local high schools for years. And when I would have an adult group in a class, I would say, how many of you have stolen something as a child? Almost everybody has stolen something as a child. And what do you remember about that? And almost to a person, they remember their parents' reaction,
Mm,
their parents' anger.
mm,
They don't remember what they learned other than how to appease or work with their parent.
mm,
And when I go to my spiritual roots, I'm thinking, that's not doing this individual a bit of good for their life. They need to know their reaction, what their learning is.
mm,
And that's what I was going for. And it was astounding to me that it was a one-time learning, because when you learn your lesson, you're
mm.
finished with it. You're
Yeah.
complete.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had an incident as a child, as a teenager, a same kind of thing influenced by relatives. And it was the same kind of thing. But for me, I had such shame after it happened. I actually gave away the item and it never happened again. Because it just, for me, it was, I didn't need any outside. It
Mhm.
just happened. And then I went, what just happened? And so sometimes that works too, depending.
Well, I would be interested in the long-term effects of that shame, however. In my learning, shame is a mental computation that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah.
And to carry that through your life, if you don't find ways to release it, can also be damaging. Uh,
Mm,
I replaced shame with remorse, which is, I would have preferred not to have done that. What would I
right.
like to do different next time?
Right.
But we do use shame, shaming others and shaming ourselves to control them. And what I've been looking for as a therapist and in my own life is to be in charge of myself without having to feel guilty or shame or fear or lonely or whatever. How can I be in charge of my life without going through all those things that
Right.
still are not helpful? And they're
Mhm.
just there to help me learn. So why not learn the lesson and move on?
Mhm. Yeah. When when you work with people, Ilene, and you've worked with thousands, is there any one thing that you find is a running theme? Is it people are scared? Are they afraid? Do they have shame? Are they dealing with loss? Is there a theme or no?
I don't find a predominant theme. I find that almost all of us know all of the emotions you just listed off. And it depends on who we are, what our own nature is, what we experienced in childhood, the kinds of messages we got back, how we've been treated, which of those we focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. As you said, and we're all different. What might affect me in one way may not affect you in the same way.
Yeah.
So tell us one of your stories from one of your many books that really stands out for you? I mean, the one with your son was a wonderful story, but tell us another story that you think is a real, significant moment.
Wow,
There's
my
many.
brain. There are so many. There are so many. I think, oh, interesting what came in. Deciding to forgive my molester. As a child, I was molested, as many girls are, and I held a grudge toward this person, this man, for 40 years.
Hmm.
And then I talked with him and asked him to take responsibility for what he'd done, and lo and behold, he didn't remember it. Didn't
Really?
remember it at all. And I have the conclusion that we all like to think we're good people, and we forget things that don't tell us we're good. But I still was carrying the anger, and uh, and when we carry anger, we're doing damage to ourselves. We're destroying our self-esteem. We're blocking our success. We're possibly making our lives shorter. And I came to the conclusion this person got ill, and I knew it was a lethal illness, and so I knew he was going to die. And I thought, I don't want to keep carrying this. So I talked with him, and I led off and said, I forgive you. Will you accept my forgiveness? Now, to me, forgiveness means I let this go. Doesn't mean I forget it. I let it go. And he accepted my forgiveness. And then I said, will you forgive me? Because I know you've been upset with me, being angry with you and some of the things I've said. So will you forgive me? And he agreed to do that. And I accepted it. And then I was able to thank him for being in my lifetime. And
Hmm.
when he died, I went to his funeral and I wasn't crying. And somebody I knew walked up to me and said, why don't you cry? And I said, I'm finished. I
Hmm.
never realized that grief has a lot to do with things you never said or never completed, but
Hmm.
I completed it. And
Did it bother you at all that he didn't remember?
at first, yes, but what could I do about it?
Right,
I
right.
mean, we know nationally Clarence Thomas years ago and Anita Hill, he said nothing happened. Many people believed that Anita Hill was indeed sexually accosted, right?
Hmm.
But he said he didn't remember it. And people go, how can he do that? Well, I said, even if he did it, he may not remember it because he likes to think of himself as a good
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. Ilene, what's your message for our listeners in all of this, in the many topics that you talk about?
I think my message, what I'm wanting people to get these days is that we're all here as learners. We're not bad, we're not good, we're learners.
Hmm.
And we have not really been taught to be active learners, and therefore our lives are more difficult. There's more resistance, emotional resistance, all kinds of resistance. And what I'm still working and writing and doing meeting with people over Zoom because I want to tell as many people as possible that we're here to learn, that we're not given lessons that are incapable of learning. And the sooner we get to the learning, and I'm giving tools in what I'm writing and talking about, the sooner we get to that learning and do it, the easier and more enjoyable our lives are. I had a very difficult childhood. Uh, I just talked about one instance, but my father was also in the military, and I went to 14 different school districts and lived in a dozen homes.
Hmm.
And and I was removed from my birth mother when I was 2 years old and never saw her again. All kinds of things that were difficult and traumatic. And what I'm so thrilled about is that what I'm talking about in working with emotions and understanding this system for living life is a route that has worked for me and hundreds of other people to get clear of that so that now I'm living by myself, enjoying myself, have friends, feel loved, all kinds of things that I didn't have in my life before.
Yeah.
And I want that for everybody.
And what you did is you took very tough experiences and you transformed them, and it became your life teaching for other people. You know, I've often said this. There's a book by Richard Bach called Illusions. I got to interview him. It's a little parable book, and in there is a seal. And here's what he says, and this has been my life. We teach others what we need to learn most for ourselves. And then
Right.
we learn it because it's continual. Continual. Ilene, it's just been a pleasure. Tell people how they can find you and your books.
Okay. Well, my website is emotionalmasteryforlife.com. We're compiling a list now because some of the books are available on Amazon and some are privately produced. So I'm working with my VA to do a list. But if you write me at Ilene, Ilene, at Emotional Mastery for Life and ask me for that list, I'll send it to you. The Wellness Universe books are available on Amazon. It's called The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, and our sixth book is being released tomorrow,
Wonderful.
the
And that's
the 8th.
many of you, right? There are many of you in a consortium that write.
Right. And this book is, I'm in 5 of the 6 books. For some reason, when we got to goddesses, I didn't relate to myself as a goddess, so I skipped that book. But this one, I'm writing about what Humpty Dumpty has to teach us about putting the fragments of our lives back
Mm,
together
mm,
again.
mm. Again, it was really wonderful. And as you said,
Thank
you
you.
gave us your website. They find you on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram.
Yes, yes. Ilene Dillon, ILENE DILLON, on each of those. Same,
Okay,
same. And
thank you.
you can also find me. I have a listing on the Wellness Universe also.
Okay.
So
Thanks so much, Ilene, for being on. I know we did an interview several years ago, so it's wonderful to have you back on again.
it's my
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay on the line. All right. All right, everyone. That wraps up this edition of the Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show. If you'd like to get a copy of my newsletter so you can see all these wonderful guests I have on each week, write to me. I send it out on the first of the month, every month, patricia@patriciaraskin.com. And if you'd like to get your positive message out, which is what I help people do every week, and you'd like to have your own podcast series, contact me. I've interviewed over 5,000 people in my career, and I'd love to help you put together your podcast. Remember, stay healthy, stay happy, get the support you need, and know you can make your dreams come true. Until next time, I'm Patricia Raskin. Bye for now.